For a long time, the people who wrote about Africa's past were mostly Eurocentric. Africanists, these Western historians, acted like experts on African history but often tried to change and control the African narrative. Theophile Obenga, a respected African scholar and master linguist, demonstrated how these Eurocentric views were full of biases and dishonesty. One of the most vocal Eurocentric Africanists was Felomar. He struggled to understand why Ch Diop, a prominent African historian, did not seek fame or academic recognition. Diop was dedicated to African history and his people, which was very different from the Eurocentric Africanists who chased after fame and awards. Felomar's critique of Diop showed his struggle to accept African intellectuals as equals. Eurocentric Africanists have always been adept at using words in tricky ways. For example, Felomar was confused about calling African scholars Africanists. Theophile Obenga rightfully pointed out that it was absurd to call African scholars Afrocentrist or Africanists. For instance, an English professor of English and English civilization at the University of London, of English origin, is not an Anglist but an English researcher. This manipulation of words made African scholarship seem less important and objective. As Africans and people of African descent, it is important to note that Ch Diop's work helped Africans around the world connect with their history. This wasn't just academic work, it was about reclaiming identity. Eurocentric Africanists didn't grasp this because their views were based on dividing and exploiting African history. Next, we will examine the debunking of the so-called Greek miracle. Paul Cartage admitted that Europeans finally understood the complexities of ethnicity and multiculturalism in world history. He reluctantly acknowledged the Kittic or Egyptian influence on Greek civilization. Martin Bernal's work, which showed how Egyptian culture influenced Greece, challenged the old belief in the Greek miracle. Theophile Obenga was very firm in his criticism of how Eurocentric scholars resisted accepting these connections because it threatened their sense of superiority. After exposing the plans of Western scholars, a new field of African scholarship emerged, the so-called New Africanism. Scholars like Felomar and others set a new trap for African history. They pretended to fix past mistakes but still held on to their power. Ethnographic studies were updated but remained stuck in colonial thinking. Theophile Obenga, our master linguist, compared this to expecting a mango tree to grow coconuts. It just wouldn't happen. These strategies kept African scholars defending their history instead of freely exploring it. It is worth noting that Eurocentric Africanists wanted to maintain their control over the narrative. Obenga's critiques of their research exposed their psychological, semantic, and intellectual tricks. In a way, Obenga laid the foundation for us to challenge these biases and reclaim African history from those who distorted it. Eurocentric historians claimed their work was objective, meaning it was free from bias. They presented their stories as the ultimate truth while dismissing other perspectives as biased. Theophile Obenga dismantled this myth, showing the deep prejudices that colored their views of African history. Historians like Clarence Walker and Pascal Vernes often claimed their critiques of African scholars were unbiased. Walker's critique of Malfida Sant's work was full of misunderstandings. Obenga showed how African scholars weren't making up history, they were simply reclaiming it from colonial suppression. Henry Tau's work on African historical linguistics showed how far Eurocentric Africanists would go to maintain their dominance. Obenga exposed Tau's flawed arguments. Tourou used outdated classifications like Hamitic to divide African languages. He sought to separate Kemet from the rest of Africa, ignoring the real connections across African languages and keeping the colonial mindset alive. It is important to note that vocabulary is not just a list of words, it also reflects culture, society, and psychology. Here are some examples that show this connection between Kemet and the rest of Black Africa. Sam, meaning priest, a figure who wore leopard skin attire. Sema, meaning chief of cult. Sam, meaning chief of cult. Si, meaning sanctify, honor, bless. Se, meaning pray, sanctify. Fang, meaning worship, honor. There are countless linguistic similarities across various African languages. These examples show how similar words in different African languages connect to important cultural roles and practices in Kemet. Beatrix Midden-Rein used the concept of hybridization to explain Egyptian civilization. We have covered this lie in previous videos on this channel. Theophile argued that this was scientifically and culturally wrong as it suggested that Africa's advancements came from outside. This view undermined Africa's own achievements and maintained the myth that Africa was passive and dependent on others. Pascal Vernes made inaccurate comparisons between Egyptian and Semitic languages. Obenga criticized him for ignoring rigorous methods and picking similarities out of context. Vernes' approach created a false narrative that separated Egypt from the rest of Africa culturally and linguistically. The Afroasiatic language family hypothesis, despite lacking scientific proof, continues to be used by Eurocentric scholars. Obenga pointed out that even foremost scholars at the time, like Carlton T. Hodge, admitted that this language family was unproven, yet it is still being used to divide African history and reinforce the idea of a hierarchy with Europe at the top. The myth of objectivity was a powerful tool for Eurocentric historians to control African history. Obenga revealed their biases and flawed methods by exposing these weaknesses. He defended African scholarship and called for a more honest approach to historiography that respected African history. My name is Thyla. I come from Congo, originally from Central Africa. I am now teaching at San Francisco State University, and my field of expertise is basically African civilization, specifically Egypt. I teach philosophy, linguistics, and nature studies, and the type of language they use is called an Afroasiatic language. But this doesn't really exist. The Afroasiatic family is almost impossible to unify. Semitic languages like Akkadian, Hebrew, Phoenician, Arabic, and the Bana Kushite and Egyptian languages cannot be placed in the same family. No one can do it. It's impossible when it's just pure ideology without scientific facts. We removed the Egyptian language from these fake families called the Afroasiatic family in the United States and in France. Basically, they call it the Kemetic family. There is no such thing. The battle for African history wasn't just about the past, it was about the present and the future. Theophile Obenga's critique highlighted the need for African scholars to reclaim their history and assert their intellectual agency. Historical memory was crucial for identity and agency. The erasure and distortion of African history by Eurocentric scholars left deep scars. Obenga emphasized reclaiming this memory as vital for African identity. Obenga called for going beyond Eurocentric narratives to embrace Africa's diversity. This required changing how history was taught and researched, challenging biases, and learning from African scholars. Afrocentric scholarship is essential for reclaiming history, centering African perspectives, and offering a more accurate understanding. Obenga highlighted the need to support these Afrocentric voices, recognizing their role in challenging Eurocentric views of African history. This support should extend beyond academia to include cultural institutions and public discourse spaces, such as YouTube. Reclaiming African history has profound implications for identity. It empowers Black individuals and communities, providing continuity, pride, and belonging. It challenges stereotypes used to justify oppression by asserting historical agency. Africans will redefine their place in the world. In the past, African scholars and intellectuals stated that Africanists who once controlled educating and influencing African elites had lost their influence and needed to recognize a paradigm shift in writing African history. African intellectuals fought against the intellectual dominance and cultural arrogance of Eurocentric Africanists, emphasizing that these scholars did not understand Africa's issues better than Africans themselves. They, in particular, opposed the Africanist sense of superiority and underlying racism. African scholars rejected derogatory labels like primitivism and Afrocentrism that Eurocentric Africanists used to demean African perspectives. They advocated for terms like Pan-Africanism, African unity, and African Renaissance, viewing them as essential for political, economic, cultural, and historical progress. The stance of Africanist studies was criticized for being negative and dismissive of African cultural unity, historical consciousness, and the African Renaissance. African scholars refuted the notion that Pharaonic Egypt was anything but an African civilization, arguing that it was built by Black Africans and that its language was related to other African languages. Our scholars highlighted the contributions of Africans in various fields, from art and literature to science and philosophy, both historically and in modern times. They pointed out the achievements of notable African scientists and intellectuals, showing that Africans had excelled globally despite the biases of Eurocentric Africanism. In conclusion, African intellectuals called for an end to the racist and Eurocentric approach of Africanist studies. They emphasized the importance of mutual respect, human dignity, and cooperation, urging a move away from outdated colonial stereotypes and towards recognizing the true value and contributions of African civilizations and people. They aspired to a future where the achievements of all humanity, regardless of race, were acknowledged and celebrated. Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. The journey continues, challenging the Eurocentric narrative. As we move forward in this exploration of African history, it is essential to reflect on how the narratives presented to us have shaped our understanding of the continent. Have you ever stopped to think about how many stories were told from a perspective that doesn't truly reflect Africa's diversity and cultural richness? How many times have you wondered if the history you learned in school truly represented reality? The efforts of Theophile Obenga and other African scholars are not just academic, they are acts of resistance and cultural affirmation. They seek to break free from the chains of the colonial past that tried to silence African voices. But how can we, as individuals and as a society, support this change? What can we do to ensure that the stories told about Africa are fair, accurate, and respectful? Rewriting history, the importance of the African perspective. Rewriting African history from an African perspective is not just a matter of historical correction, it is a necessity for identity and cultural pride. Imagine if your own family's history was told only by someone from outside, without considering your experiences and values. Does that make sense? Of course not. The same goes for Africa's history. It is fundamental that Africans have control over their own narrative so they can represent their own experiences and achievements authentically. Have you ever reflected on how history shapes our identity? When we know where we come from and recognize our own achievements, we feel a sense of belonging and pride. On the other hand, when our history is distorted or omitted, it can lead to feelings of devaluation and alienation. How do you think this affects current and future generations of Africans and people of African descent? The role of education in transforming the narrative. Education plays a crucial role in transforming the historical narrative. Curricula that include authentic African perspectives help combat deeply rooted stereotypes and prejudices. Have you ever thought about what it would be like if schools incorporated more content about ancient African civilizations, their contributions to science, art, and philosophy? This not only enriches students' knowledge but also promotes a deeper and more respectful understanding of cultural diversity. Additionally, training teachers and educators who are aware of these issues is essential. They are responsible for transmitting knowledge and can significantly influence students' perceptions of African history. How can we encourage more inclusive and comprehensive training for our educators? Current challenges and the path forward. Despite the progress, we still face many challenges in the fight against the Eurocentric narrative. The media, for example, often perpetuates negative stereotypes about Africa, focusing on conflicts, poverty, and diseases while ignoring stories of success, innovation, and resilience. Have you noticed how the media can influence our perception of an entire continent? How can we use platforms like YouTube, blogs, and social media to tell more balanced and inspiring stories about Africa? Another challenge is the lack of access to academic resources and funding for African researchers. Without adequate support, it is difficult for African scholars to produce and disseminate high-quality research that can counter dominant narratives. What can we do to support these researchers and ensure that their voices are heard and valued? Celebrating Africa's cultural diversity. Africa is a continent of immense cultural diversity, with thousands of languages, traditions, and unique histories. Celebrating this diversity is essential to combat the monolithic view often imposed by Eurocentrism. Have you explored the cultural richness of different regions of Africa? From the vibrant music and dance of West Africa to the sophisticated literary traditions of East Africa, there is so much to discover and appreciate. Promoting cultural exchanges and encouraging the learning of different African languages can enrich our mutual understanding and respect. How can you get involved or support initiatives that promote Africa's cultural diversity in your community? The impact of historical reclamation today. Reclaiming African history has profound implications in contemporary society. It not only strengthens cultural identity but also influences public policies, civil rights, and the fight against racial discrimination. When people have access to a truly representative history, they are better equipped to face social challenges and promote justice and equality. Have you ever considered how a deeper understanding of African history can impact your own perceptions and actions in the world? In what ways can you contribute to a more inclusive and informed society about Africa's true history and culture? Inspiring future generations. One of the most important goals in rewriting African history is to inspire future generations. Young Africans and descendants of Africans need to see positive role models in their history and culture to believe in their own potential. Stories of African leaders, innovators, artists, and thinkers can serve as powerful sources of inspiration and motivation. Do you know someone whose personal story was transformed by a positive role model or a deeper understanding of their cultural heritage? How can we ensure that these stories are widely shared and celebrated? The importance of unity and collaboration. The fight against the Eurocentric narrative is not a solitary battle, it is a collective effort that requires unity and collaboration among scholars, communities, and institutions. By working together, we can create a support network that promotes authentic research, inclusive education, and cultural celebration. How can you get involved or support initiatives that promote unity and collaboration in reclaiming African history? What different roles can individuals and organizations play to strengthen this movement? Final reflections, a call to action. The journey to dismantle Eurocentric narratives and reclaim an authentic African history is long and challenging but also deeply rewarding. Every step we take towards a fairer and more accurate understanding of African history contributes to building a more inclusive and respectful future. Are you ready to be part of this transformation? What actions can you take today to support the appreciation and dissemination of true African history? Remember that every small contribution counts and that together we can create a world where all stories are heard and respected. Building a lasting legacy. At the end of this journey, what truly matters is the legacy we leave for future generations. A legacy of respect, knowledge, and cultural pride. When lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will no longer glorify the hunter but celebrate the strength and wisdom of the lions themselves. Have you thought about the legacy you want to leave? How do you want future generations to remember your contribution to the appreciation of African history and culture? Each of us has the power to positively influence this narrative, ensuring that the rich tapestry of African history is told with the dignity and respect it deserves. The role of technology in disseminating African history. We live in a digital age where technology can be a powerful tool for disseminating true African history. Online platforms, social media, blogs, and podcasts allow African scholars and descendants to share their research and stories with a global audience. Have you used these tools to learn more about African history? How can we leverage technology to amplify African voices and ensure their stories reach more people? Additionally, the digitization of historical archives and the creation of accessible online libraries democratize access to knowledge. This not only preserves history but also makes it available to anyone who wishes to learn and connect with their cultural roots. What technological initiatives do you know of or can support that aim to preserve and share African history? The importance of the arts in historical reclamation. The arts, literature, music, cinema, theater, and visual arts, play a crucial role in reclaiming and celebrating African history. They offer a powerful way to express experiences, tell stories, and challenge dominant narratives. Have you watched a movie, read a book, or listened to music that changed your perception of Africa? How can the arts be used to educate and inspire social change? Encouraging African artists to tell their own stories ensures that cultural representations are authentic and multifaceted. Moreover, supporting artistic productions that explore the diversity of the African experience contributes to a richer and more empathetic understanding of the continent's history. How can you support or get involved with the arts that promote African history and culture? The strength of community in historical reclamation. Community is a fundamental pillar in the fight against Eurocentric narratives. Community groups, non-governmental organizations, and social movements play a vital role in promoting education, organizing cultural events, and advocating for inclusive policies. Have you participated in any community event that celebrates African culture? How can communities come together to strengthen the reclamation of African history? Additionally, building bridges between different communities and cultures fosters intercultural dialogue that enriches mutual understanding and combats prejudice. When diverse communities unite to celebrate and share their stories, bonds of respect and solidarity are created that benefit everyone. What community actions can you support or initiate to promote the appreciation of African history in your area? Encouraging research and academic innovation. To continue challenging Eurocentric narratives, it is essential to promote research and academic innovation within African universities and international institutions. Encouraging the production of authentic knowledge and supporting scholarships and funding for African researchers are important steps in this direction. Do you know of any African researchers whose work deserves more recognition? How can we encourage more research that values the African perspective in historiography? Moreover, international collaboration between scholars from different parts of the world can enrich research and promote a more balanced and respectful exchange of knowledge. Partnerships that respect and value African contributions are fundamental to a more inclusive global understanding. How can you promote or participate in academic collaborations that favor diverse perspectives? The influence of public policies on historical appreciation. Public policies have a significant impact on how history is taught and valued. Governments and educational institutions have the responsibility to create curricula that include fair and accurate representation of African history. Have you ever wondered how your country's educational policies treat African history? What policy changes would be necessary to promote more inclusive and representative education? Additionally, policies that encourage the preservation of cultural heritage and the documentation of local histories are essential to ensure that Africa's rich history is maintained for future generations. How can we advocate for policies that support the preservation and appreciation of African history? The importance of representation in media and institutions. Representation in media and academic institutions is crucial for transforming the historical narrative. Having more historians, teachers, and communicators of African origin in teaching platforms and media ensures that stories are told from within, reflecting the true African experiences and perspectives. Have you noticed the lack of African representation in certain media outlets or academic institutions? How can we increase this representation to ensure a more balanced and fair narrative? Additionally, the presence of African leaders and representatives in influential positions contributes to more inclusive and informed decision-making regarding cultural and historical issues. How can you support the inclusion of more African voices in media and educational institutions? Individual responsibility in historical reclamation. While large collective efforts are essential, individual responsibility also plays an important role in reclaiming African history. Each of us can contribute to this transformation through continuous education, promoting respectful dialogues, and disseminating accurate information. Are you willing to challenge your own biases and seek a deeper understanding of African history? What steps can you take to educate yourself more about Africa's true history and culture? Moreover, sharing knowledge and supporting initiatives that promote the appreciation of African history can have a significant impact. Whether by participating in cultural events, supporting African authors, or simply discussing the topic with friends and family, every action counts. How can you use your own platforms and networks to support this cause? Conclusion: the future of African history. The journey to reclaim and value African history is ongoing and requires everyone's effort. As more African voices gain space and more authentic narratives are shared, we move towards a fairer and more inclusive understanding of the past. But this is not just about the past, it's about building a future where all stories are respected and celebrated. Are you ready to be part of this transformation? What legacy do you want to leave for future generations in terms of recognizing and valuing African history? Remember that each of us has the power to positively influence the historical narrative, ensuring that the rich tapestry of African history is told with the dignity and respect it deserves. Together, we can create a world where lion stories are told by their own historians, celebrating their strength, wisdom, and resilience. No matter how challenging the path may be, the pursuit of historical justice is a journey worth undertaking, not only for Africans but for all of humanity. After all, recognizing and valuing true African history enriches our global understanding and promotes a more equitable and respectful world for everyone.